Welcome back to the newest episode of Brogressive. I'm here with my co-host Dylan, and we're here with a congressional candidate for California's 32nd, Jake Rakov. He's a former Capitol Hill staffer. He's running against his former boss, Brad Sherman. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So, Jake, one of those things that I like to think about, and this is one of those things I took away from my time in DC, which not nearly as long as yours. I heard about experience on the Hill, and one of those things, being a young person, you always hear about, the members are too old, the gerontocracy, they're 80 something, but the other side of the is the experience they bring to the table. And so one of the things when we want younger members is also experienced people. We want people who understand how Congress and all these complex systems work. A lot of the times we don't see that, right? People come in, they think, oh, we can fix this, make it move fast, whatever, right? They don't understand that. I seem to think that you are the exception to that rule. You were a staffer, you did the work, right? You were the one doing the hard legislative work. So as a candidate, how do you flip that on its head? And what are your thoughts about the experience you bring to the table, but the youth, the other side of that coin?
Yeah, no, thanks A for first having me on, and B bringing this up, this kind of topic we're discussing. I think today is a unique time to discuss this. Also, we just saw Congressman Robert Garcia get elected to ranking member on oversight after Jerry Connolly passed away, and after he fought for that spot over AOC back in November, December of last year. Kind of sums up this whole idea that we're talking about of the gerontocracy and what is that experience versus the age and worldview and all those kinds of things. And I think to your point about DC and staffers, yeah, I worked on the Hill. I worked for Congressman Sherman, the guy I'm running against. I was his deputy comms director, and it was kind of that experience that earlier this year when I saw him using similar talking points and tactics that I helped advise for him back in 2017 in Trump's first term. He's reusing and recycling now 8 years later, thinking that it is somehow going to work, or like that's what we really need right now, was a big part of why I ran. If you work on the Hill, if you work in DC, you see the staffers for these members who are out there writing legislation, taking care of the vote tallies and all that kind of thing. The amount of people who have been on the Hill for a long time on the staff side are the ones really running those offices. And I think that's not to downplay, obviously, the candidates themselves or the politicians themselves, but there is so much work done at the staff level of negotiating, of working out those deals with other offices, of fine-tuning language and legislation, that having a person just say, oh, I'm the only person who can do this because I've been in this representative seat for 30 plus years is so short-sighted, and that ego is exactly what I'm trying to run against and eradicate from the party, that it doesn't come down to one person to be the savior for this district or the only one who can represent this issue or whatever. And I think you're starting to see that. I think part of my campaign is running on, the idea of term limits, the idea of no corporate PAC money in town halls. Part of that is, even if on the Democratic side we had term limits for our ranking members and chairmanships like the Republicans do, even that a little bit of shuffle that it would allow is exponentially better than the system we have now that has gotten us so stuck and out of touch, I think, with so many folks.
Yeah, and I mean, this has been a fight that's been going on since 2018. I mean, you think about AOC versus Joe Crowley in that 2018 primary and knock down the House, that whole Netflix documentary. Why do you think it's obviously it's still an ongoing effort. You're the next iteration of the newer generation coming in. Why do you think there's been such pushback from the older generation to hold on to power? And why do you think it's taking maybe longer than some younger voters and older voters alike? Well, some older voters want new faces in politics. Why do you think it's taking longer than it might other some voters might want it to?
I think it's a couple of different things. I think first off, certainly for the politicians that are there and are holding on to that power, it is comfortable. It is what they know. And I think for a lot of them, it becomes their life. It becomes their idea that, oh, I'm the congressperson from, the Arizona second or the Maine two or whatever. Like it just becomes their identity, and they can't see the world outside of that. And there's, I think, a lot of people who see that idea of, oh, I'm this congressperson. This is all I have to offer. And because they've been in that ladder for their entire life. They ran for city council back in the 80s, and now they, got to Congress in the 90s, and now they're still there. So they don't have that idea of, oh, there's someone else who can take this seat, or I can do something else to help my community and I can serve in other places. I think you'll see people obviously who climb, who go up to Senate or governor and do other things like that. But there's a 436 members of Congress. There's not enough ladder rungs for them to climb up. So they get to their point and they're like, oh, this is, I get to do this and this is my height. And they don't want to let go of that. And that's an ego problem, right? That's a thing of, and then they get comfortable. They get to serve on leadership or a committee chair or whatever. And they think, oh, I have this subject matter expertise and no one else can do this. I think the moment that made me a Joker, like my Joker origin story, was a couple years ago when Dianne Feinstein ran for Senate here in California. And obviously she passed away in office, but she was talking to, I think there were like some teenagers that couldn't even vote yet about climate change. and they were saying, "You're not voting for our future." And she was like, "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm the only one who can sit in this seat." And she died in that seat. And it's like, that was the moment I saw, and I was like, these people are never going to learn. Like, they're never going to realize that there is an army of people behind them. And I think a big part of that is A, they're comfortable, B, incumbency protection from the party system allows them to not have to really run for reelection. This is a position that you're supposed to reapply for every 2 years. You run for reelection. They're redistricted every 10 years. The framers did not intend for this job to be a lifetime appointment. Our party system has allowed that. And so for even a moderately involved voter, all they ever see is the same name with the little incumbency sign and their party name next to it on the ballot. They're just going to keep voting and not really think about it.
Well, it's interesting you raise that topic because I think one of the hard things is, like you said, it's not a lifetime position. It's meant to be competitive. It's meant to flip around. And the hardest thing is there's only so many competitive districts in this country, right? A lot of the districts are very lopsided. So members are comfortable. They're safe. They sit there and they sit there as long as they, well, goddamn please. When you have a district that's D plus 14, it's like, well, doesn't really matter who's going to run because unless it's, a 2008 or a major election swing, you're pretty much safe. And I'd be interested to hear what you have to say regarding your district with California's 32nd, but also that incumbency of, oh, well, this is my district, and speaking to me a little bit more about Representative Sherman of, nope, I'm the only one who can do it. I'm the only one that can represent this, and maybe a little bit that psyche of what goes on in there.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. The 32nd district, I think, is like a D plus 20, maybe, like maybe 22 on the last cycle. So, like, it is obviously a safe seat. There's about, 25% of the district is like Republican or independent leaning. But for the most part, unless something crazy happens, this will be a democratically held seat, or at least the next census. And I think what you have seen is someone like Congressman Sherman, who's been in office since 1996, when I was 8 years old. I don't think y'all were even born yet. Was like that, he's been there for so long. And so the party just takes him as that person to be the representative of this district. So if someone wants to challenge him, someone says, "Oh, I'm a teacher. I'm a, community activist in this area. I'm a labor leader in this area. And I'm a Democrat. I want to challenge him." You go to the party. You're not an elected person. You're not someone you care about your district and you just disagree with them or think it's time for him to go, like me. You go to the party, they're going to shut every door in your face. Every consultant, every donor, every, operative that you could possibly hire is going to be blackballed by the party because of that incumbency protection. Because they don't want to infight. They don't want to have that, no one talks about at the dinner table kind of thing. They don't want that infighting. And so they blackball you to protect incumbency. So even if you have a great state rep or city council member who is ready to take that next step to Congress, even they're afraid to do it because even if they have, their own donor base and their own constituency base in this district, which there are some great people in this district, they can't step up because if he's just there as a ceiling and not stepping away and not doing anything, you have that ego of, "Oh, I'm the only one who can sit in this seat." And I worked for Congressman Sherman for a year. He has that ego. He honestly believes he is the only one who can represent this district. And even though he hasn't had a town hall in 5 years, he only has one tiny field office here, and he never gets back to the district. He still thinks he's the only one who can properly represent the 750,000 people of basically the Valley in West LA, which is just insane when you think about it.
Well, he might be too old to get back on the plane to get back here, so I think that's part of the issue.
It's a physical. I totally get it. I've taken that red eye so many times in my life. It's not easy. So you have to wonder, like, you're 70 years old, like, why do you still want to do that? Why, what is it about it that once you want to be put through that? And it's just, that's another part of, the whole calculus.
Yeah. What are you hearing from people who live in the district about this issue? Or is this something that like has come up over the past few election cycles? Because I mean, like you said, Brad Sherman has been in office since before any of us were born. Is this something that's coming up when you go canvass and phone bank voters?
Yeah, so it absolutely is. There's a good number of people that I've had proactively reach out to be like, "I'm a lifelong Valley resident. I've lived here my whole life. I've been here 20 years. It's always been Brad. We're ready for the new leadership. We need new people in." And there's a lot of people who say, like, "We haven't seen him in a while. He hasn't had a town hall. He hasn't been back here in years." Even after he got redistricted in 2020, after the 2020 census, his district from what I worked from in 2017 to what it is now is vastly different. He got the entire west side all the way out to Malibu. He didn't used to have that before. So there's a huge swath of California that he just has zero connection to, and he's not making any inroads there proactively to go out there and like introduce himself, say, "Hey, I'm your new congressperson. Here's my office. Here's who you can talk to." He hasn't done that. And I think nowadays it is so easy for people, especially Congress, to be accessible and accountable through social media, through online outreach, and he's just not doing any of that. And so I think you're starting to hear that from voters, at least I am, that Yeah, he's here, he's been there forever, whatever. It's a Democrat vote because in the top two primary system we have here in California, it's always a Republican who gets in because he takes the Democrats and there's enough Republicans to get second place in the ballot. So it's not going to go Republican. So he hasn't ran a campaign in over a decade, like a serious campaign. And I think people are just like tired of seeing his name on the ballot and not getting anything out of it, not really having any connection to their congressperson when this district is so dynamic and so diverse and really deserves a better actual leader.
On that topic, it seems to me that like your most realistic path to victory is probably moving on in that top two, forcing it to be Dem v Dem. How would you approach the races if it did get to that point? And do you feel like you can kind of convince a lot of those Republicans just with that argument that regardless of a few policy disagreements, at least most people just want a congressman that is actually accessible and available and feels like they're putting the work in? Is that how you would plan to approach that?
Yeah, I think there's a good number of people up there who are like decently open to the idea of, just someone new in the office, someone who they can work with, someone who has new ideas to help this district that I feel like has kind of been left behind in a lot of different ways through like infrastructure spending and job programs. And we have a bunch of great universities in this campus in this area that I feel like are underrepresented a lot. And so going to them and saying, hey, like, let's talk about small business funds. Let's talk about grants. Let's talk about apprenticeships for college graduates. Let's talk about more affordable housing and transportation spending in this area for either rail or bus. They're trying to do this all but a pass now, which will be a clusterfuck, I'm sure. Excuse my language. But so I think that's a big part of it is just someone who has more creative thinking, who can use the bully pulpit more, who can be a more open communicator and be more accessible is really what I think so many people are just wanting to have right now because it's so easy and it's so obvious. Like, why aren't you doing this? Why can't we have this relationship with our congressperson and actually re-engage people in politics in a new way? And I think once we get to that primary to where it's a Dem on Dem, I think that his incumbency reduction goes away a lot now that there's two Democrats on the ballot, first off, but B, also, the race just becomes so much more interesting where it's actually a choice at this point. And so that's where we see how we would approach it.
No, it's interesting you say that with the accessibility. I think a lot about the next generation, right? We always hear about, oh, passing the torch, and the next generation, we want new voices, new whatever, and it feels like lip service, right? We always talk about, oh, we need a new politics, we need new things, we need podcasts, we need people to use TikTok, and it's like, okay, you can't just tell your staffer, hey, get me a social media, and then have them hand you the phone when you don't know how it works. And I think a lot about my time in DC where, the members were like, oh, we don't do this, we don't do that, we don't do social media, our way works and it worked this way. And it's like, okay, but that's not gonna work forever. And this house of cards will come tumbling down. Mailers that are great, but what are people on 24/7? They're on this thing. And that's a-okay. And we can reach people where they're at. I never understood why there weren't more members going on Instagram Live, doing live streams, going on YouTube, going on TikTok where people are. And I got my take on TikTok, which my friends hate, but whatever. Well, but there, right? And it's like even an example on Twitter, right? When a member tweets versus a staffer tweets, you can kind of tell the difference, right? It's organic, and like it or not, I always like to bring up the Jared Moskowitz tweets where it's like he says some things that you're like, wow, you probably shouldn't say that, but you know what? And I can respect that. And I do wonder, being so much younger and very clearly being social media savvy, being a comms that was deputy comms director, right? You read all that stuff.
Yeah.
What would be your approach that would be different aside from just being a voice that can go on social media, that can go on these platforms and meet people where they are? What would you plan to do differently?
So I think it's just incorporating it so much more in your day-to-day thing. I think, as you were saying, it's on 24/7. It just kind of becomes more of an extension, more of a fluency, almost like a second language. Yesterday, I helped draft tweets for the congressperson. I was back in 2017, kind of before even TikTok really was on the scene, and we did a few video clips. But it was mostly all still text-based social media, and having to show him like, oh, okay, it's 140 characters back then. I can get you like 25 words before we have to start going chains, which are totally different now. And he would hand me back like a speech. And I'm like, I can't tweet this. Like, it's not going to land. And having that constant debate of, this is the medium, this is what we're working on. If you want to do this, we can turn to an op-ed and like send it to a paper. But like, I just need a quick response to something that happened. It's like, quick, and let's get your word out and go. And just getting that, translation, I think is so much, I think some people can be taught it, but I think a generation that grew up on it, it's just so much easier. You don't think about it. You're like, okay, I have to write something for Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, and it's going to be quick and pithy, and like it takes me 30 seconds to draft. Or if I'm like walking somewhere, I take a quick selfie video for a reel or TikTok. Like, it just you just don't have to have that secondary thought process to it that I think is a big part of it. So I think it's that. I also think it's engaging on it. Like it is something like it's not just for the algorithm, but if someone writes me a message, I'm the one responding. I'm the one posting all my content. So like I can give a much more authentic answer when I get a comment saying, "Hey, what do you think about this issue?" And I type back real quick and I'm like, I'm not going to give you my entire policy book, but like I can give you 2 sentences of what I think it is. And if we want to have a longer conversation, let's do that. But I think that's a big part of it is just how you engage, how you interact, and how you actually have that fluency of, I know what I can give here and like what's acceptable, and to the audience. And knowing your audience is a big part.
Yeah, and I feel like you're giving up a lot of your not just your power, but a lot of your own voice. Like maybe your staffer will tweet something that you don't necessarily agree with, but you would never know because you don't know how to use it. And I feel like it's
Well,
always better for the constituents of that district to have, like you said, the bully pulpit be used more effectively. Like AOC's constituents, I'm sure, are loving AOC for being all over the internet. I mean, you brought up Robert Garcia. He's my congressman for Long Beach, so I'm happy with his appointment um, today or yesterday, whenever it was. But I kind of being in that position of tweeting for Brad Sherman and being in that position, I feel like you, like I mentioned, you kind of take away a lot of the genuine aspects of the person who is in office. How do you think that kind of reflects on social media? Um, like, what what could congresspeople, elected officials, or maybe just members of the Democratic Party in general be doing more on social media to reflect that genuine person that they are, that they want to be, maybe if it's controversial, like Max said?
well, I think, it's also a huge part of this. And I think when you work as a congressperson and you kind of join a new office or you work for someone new, there's kind of a learning curve of, okay, I have to find their voice. I have to figure out what they are. So if I draft a statement for someone, I want it to be as authentic sounding to them as possible so that if they go and say the same quote on CNN, it lands well. Because if you hear someone talk and you obviously are saying, oh, you don't actually believe that, you're just repeating something. Even in video, like even in person to person, you're like, why are you saying that? Like, it's not authentic. It's that monument imitation valley thing. That's like something's off. So I think for us, it's more about, for Democrats especially, it's not that every congressperson needs to be running their own TikTok or running their own Twitter feed, and it's not about staff getting their voice a little bit better, but I think it is just more about showing these people as people. Like they are not 100% on everything. They're going to have flubs. They're going to have little misstatements, stuff like that. And I think it's kind of just showing that human nature of it to be, you're not an expert in everything. You don't have to have the pitch perfect quote response to every single thing, right? You don't have to comment on everything. You don't have to do this. So I think just utilizing it in a much more human way is where more Democrats can, if you're not going to be fluent in it and you want a staff to do it, just showing them in a much more human and approachable way and going into audiences, going on podcasts, going into with other influencers and stuff like that, like where your channels are, in a more kind of natural, curious, human conversational way, it's going to get you so much more response rate than putting up some random 30-second video, excuse me, to like whatever just happened.
Yeah, I think that's great to hear. I feel like people kind of overly state the distinction between these two sides of the job and act like the social media side is kind of just this performative marketing thing. But I really think nowadays it's part of the job. And I think we saw that with Biden, where there was a lot of things he got done, but part of being president, the job of being president, is acting as president on TV and sharing the message with the people so that they know what you're doing. And I think in a time where trust in Congress is so low, it's obviously a very important part of the job. But in terms of policy, I know you've said that a lot of areas you mostly agree with the representative, but it's more about actually being available in the job of congressman. So what would you say are some areas where you have a little bit of a distinction from him policy-wise? And
I
what
think
would you push
policy,
for
yeah.
in Congress as like maybe your top priority that he's not focused on enough?
Yeah, I think it's a couple different things. First off, I think this election is not going to be a ton of like policy debates in the Democratic Party as we are trying to figure out how we're going to have to rebuild the government from everything this administration is doing. So first and foremost, it's going to be, who do we want to rethink how we efficiently rebuild these government services that are being stripped away so rapidly, right? We're going to have to rebuild the Department of Education. We have to rebuild EPA and the FDA and all these things. You can do those same services in a much more efficient way without being handcuffed to the ideas of the past of how government used to run just because that was how it ran. I think that's going to be the first policy differences. Who do you trust to actually reinvent government to get these services more efficiently to the people that need them? Secondly, because of, I think, the age difference is that I'm going to legislate from a very different worldview than he would ever have, and that I came out of college after the 2008 financial crisis. He's been in Congress before and after that. So the idea of how do you legislate for financial protection for an up and coming generation who are seeing the same things I did, where home ownership is so far out of reach. I won't be able to afford the house my parents bought. My job market was very different than his was when he came out of college in the 70s. And it's different than the ones you guys are coming into now, as I'm sure you're seeing with your friends. So how can we get more jobs opportunities for those recent graduates to actually happen? I think one part that I want to do is work with private sector partners to get more apprenticeships into universities so that you have a better path to jobs while you're in college, so that you don't come out of college with a college degree and basically nothing to figure out of where you're going to go for a job. I would rather have the government help the private sector move in that direction versus telling the private sector what to do. Because that private-public partnership is something I really want to focus on. Secondly, this district, which is so big and so broad and contains some of the most trafficked highways in the country, we have the 405 Sepulveda to Pass in this district. We do not have a seat in transportation infrastructure. We don't have a voice in that. That's insane. For this city in this district that is so reliant on highway systems and buses and whatever light rail we can hopefully build over the next 8 years before the Olympics, or 4 years before the Olympics, we should have a bigger seat at that table. We should absolutely be advocating more for infrastructure spending that helps people who want to live out where it's a little cheaper but still work in the city. I want to be able to have that affordability to where you can cross this Sepulveda Pass and it doesn't cost you needing to sit in traffic for 8 hours. So I think those are going to be some things I really want to focus on: economic agenda, transportation infrastructure, and a lot more public-private partnerships to help create more job opportunities for those recent college graduates so that we don't have the same kind of job market that I had.
You mentioned the issue of housing, obviously the housing crisis, a very big issue in your district and the state as a whole and nationally. But a lot of that stuff does come down to local policy, a lot of NIMBYs and zoning provisions and regulations on that building of housing. So how would you approach that from a federal level if you were elected? Do you feel like there are some areas where you could streamline those processes and kind of work to make it so we can actually build enough housing fast enough?
Yeah, so I think it is. You're absolutely right. It is a very local issue. The NIMBYism and all that kind of stuff. I'm much more of the I'm an abundance Democrat. I read that book and I kind of fell in love with it. I was reading it. A, first of all, made my blood boil, and I threw it across the room a couple times. But B, it was something I had seen working in Democratic politics for my entire career. I just never had a name for it. I never had a way to surmise it. And so it's finally great seeing the same sentiment kind of get finally labeled. But I think from a federal perspective, the way federal law, I think, can influence a lot of that is through legislation and advocacy and funding. And so I can't go in and tell a city how to zone, but I can go in and say, hey, we will increase your funding if you decrease your bureaucracy by 20%. You want 20% more funding for your housing grants from the Department of Housing Urban Development? Reduce your bureaucracy by 20%. I'll do a 1-to-1. I don't care. Pick a number. But where can we find ways for the federal government to exert its power of the purse to go, okay, these are things we're seeing work elsewhere in the country. If you want that here, let's work at what we can do here. But from the federal perspective, that is bully pulpit and funding are the two biggest and almost always only tools you have to really influence local politics. And as a congressperson, I think you have kind of 3 roles to play in that. That's legislate, advocate, and communicate. And having someone like Congressman Sherman who does none of the 3 effectively does not help this district build more housing, build more transportation, and bring more job opportunities to the district.
See, it's interesting you say that because we always talk about, what are we going to do? And I'm really glad to hear you say it. I might want to hear you say it one more time, to be honest. Just, I'm an abundance Democrat because I'm so tired of hearing people going, we can just, put more money towards it, do whatever. It's okay, that's a Band-Aid over a bullet hole, but you're we're all on the same page here. The federal government doesn't really have that authority, but you have leverage. You may not be able to wave a magic wand and fix this whole thing, but you have leverage. And it's good to hear that you'd be willing to actually exert it, but not in a, I'm going to bully your local ordinance into, getting rid of single-family zoning, but hey, let me help you, help us. Everyone helps each other, right? We are governments who can work together instead of clashing, right? And it's interesting to hear you say that, especially with the college grads thing. I've been thinking about that one a lot lately, and I think that's going to be an interesting thing for the future, and only increasingly so as AI kind of mostly just limits job opportunities, but
Yeah.
nixes all these other jobs, right? I'm sure you've seen the numbers, and I'm sure I'm almost certainly referring to the same thing I am. But for the first time
Yeah.
in maybe ever, if I get that correct, college graduates have a higher unemployment rate than everybody else, than the actual standard unemployment rate. It's like what, 7% now, and the current unemployment is what, 4?
Yeah.
And that's scary, right? Being a recent college graduate, that kind of scares me. But more importantly, fixing the college system is something that's important to me. I saw, and this is just at UCSB, and I'm sure it's everywhere, all these problems, these inefficiencies, and just almost just outright waste, and really just an embarrassment of the university's money, of the government's money, of all these monies. And I think there's a place where we can have a public-private partnership with private enterprise and all these other institutions of power to fix these things. And I'm really glad to hear you say that first and foremost. But in other realms with public-private partnership, I think that's going to be really important. Do you see any other places where that might work out well for obviously just industry or housing, but maybe medical development? I know everyone loves to rag on big tech, but I like to talk about Operation Warp Speed being a huge success. I mean, we brought vaccines to market and put them in people's arms in what, less than a year? I would love to see something like that for a cancer mRNA vaccine or any other number of diseases just eradicated.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. I'll say it again. I'm an abundance Democrat, and I think what a big part of that is that in the private sector is designed to do things in a faster, more efficient way that are meant for that kind of path. The government is designed to do things in a more kind of holistic, longer-term, foundational research path. And people just said it, and actually, I wrote my graduate thesis on this of net neutrality, of the idea of the internet and communication of the internet. The government created the internet. It was DARPA, the Defense Agency Research Fund. That was invented the internet. Like, it was with the public, with a university, but it was from government funding. NASA was government funding. You have these foundational projects that are meant to be where you can't really make a profit off of the idea itself, but the idea can lead to entire industries being built, right? And that's where the public-private partnership really kicks in. And then you're able to build up entire industries and entire economic sectors off of this foundational technology and management. That's really where I believe the government's role is best suited. Case in point, housing is for one, for public-private partnerships. If you look at the cost per square footage of building a housing unit in LA versus an affordable housing unit from the government, it is exponentially different. It is insanely how much more expensive it is to do a government-funded affordable housing project versus the apartment building that's being built down the street from me. And that is something we have to look at. Okay, why is that discrepancy so much there? And what are the actual logistical, financial, step-by-step differences? Because you're building the same exact thing. Like, where's that gumming of the works happen? From a federal perspective, it goes back to that funding of, okay, we will fund this project so long as you keep costs below this dollar. If you keep costs below this dollar, more federal funds will come to you to build affordable housing. That's something the federal government can do. We can legislate that way. We can make that happen. But if all we're going to keep doing is throwing more money at the problem and go, oh, well, the cost of building one affordable housing unit now is $1.2 million a pop, like it was in Chicago recently, we're going to bankrupt our own self to solve a problem that does not need that much money to solve, right? We can do this in a much more efficient, cheaper way. And then public-private partnerships, you're right, in medical, in healthcare and tech and AI, all those kinds of things, to be able to develop those new industries and new projects that we actually can create jobs for. It was a recent time I saw a study about AI, replacing kind of those entry-level jobs and tasks, not so much jobs, but AI is replacing tasks on jobs. And so all of a sudden your workforce demands are lower because one person's job is now 70% less because of AI. So how are you going to change that? And so that's really where you start to lose jobs. And I'm looking at some of those tasks that AI can do now. And I remember my friends were applying to do that exact job out of college back in 2010. So that's where you're going to start seeing that effect. But these companies still need employees. They still need, obviously, because with more efficiency, you're going to be able to create more. You're going to be able to do more. How do you go to university and go, okay, I need graduates in this program. I need graduates who have this skill set, who are going to have this skill and be able to work in tandem with the education system and the university system to have those workers ready for the jobs in 5 years. I'd rather see that's where I want to see public.
I think that's a really interesting idea in the realm of housing to incentivize and mandate, like from the federal level, efficiency. Yeah. And that seems very obvious, like mandating that you have to be under a certain cost for building. But I think part of the problem is that the mandates we're currently seeing are very well-meaning. And it's kind of what Ezra Klein has described as the everything bagel liberalism, where a lot of these mandates aren't about the cost of it. They're about hiring the right people or paying the right wages or meeting all of these environmental standards that most normal units that are market rate aren't necessarily going to have anyway. And so how do you kind of approach that from a political perspective when a lot of those things do sound good to voters? It's kind of hard for them to inherently weigh the trade-offs of them, and they don't want to. It's easy to be attacked as like, well, you want the affordable housing units to give people asthma or something, and obviously there's a bit of a middle ground. But how do you approach that politically and really kind of focus on the outcome when you're promoting it? Because really that is what I think people ultimately care about, regardless of what they say to a poll question. But
well, I mean, I'd say, let's run a very, very quick cost benefit analysis here of like, you build a new apartment complex here in Studio City. You're not building basically, 1920s tenement with, no fire protection, no insulation, no electricity in your running water. You're building these things, even if like not everything's a luxury unit, but just a good mid-tier apartment for commercial rate will have all of the boxes we need checked for environmental safety, regulation, accessibility. Those are all things that just come naturally by where the civilization is and what we demand now. No one's going to come in and go, oh, well, it's a cheaper unit. Yeah, but you don't have running water. No, that's not going to be like a common thing. So if we want to build affordable housing, you don't need to build a Taj Mahal. Just build one good unit that's, like get your bare bones in, and obviously that's fine. So I think there's a lot of that cost benefit analysis. Like, yes, I want them to have clean air. I wanted to have good, clean water and safe infrastructure, safe building and design. But I don't need it to be a Frank Gehry building. I don't need it to be designed by IM Pei or have, Brita filters built into the wall or whatever. Like, we can find ways to manage this to go, are we going a little bit too excessive just for the sake of making ourselves feel better? That, oh, they're affordable housing, so let's put, a hydroponic greenhouse on the roof. What? Why? If someone wants to do it on their own goodwill, great. But let that be a private sector thing. Let that be a donor wants to go in and do it, or a company wants to go in and do it. That's great. That does not need to be on the taxpayer's incentive to go, well, now we have to find a proper firm to design a greenhouse for the roof of this building that's not going to affect the airflow. Like, that's where it all happens. And so for voters, if you want to feel better about something, feel better about just building more housing, getting that actual outcome done. That's what we care about. That's how it's going to happen faster. Is if we just kind of strip away all the complexities and all the things we try to feel nice about ourselves to go, do I want more housing and faster? Or am I fine with people living in tents for 8 years while we've designed this Taj Mahal affordable housing complex?
On a sort of another topic, but one of your pledges on your campaign website is to reject all corporate PAC money.
Yeah.
And so what does that practically look like, and how has it looked for you so far with how you'll fundraise? And what do you say to Democrats who maybe argue that in a time where Republicans are so dangerous that like kind of unilaterally disarming maybe is a bad idea? Or would you operate differently, maybe in a 50-50 swing district versus a place like this where maybe it's better to kind of set the standard and show that you're willing to run a people-powered campaign?
I think it's interesting. It is the one part of my pledge that so many people like connect most to is that because it's so apparent of that idea of flow of cash from a corporation to a politician, right? Especially if I represent a district that had a factory in it and the factory company that was a major employee in my unit in my district wanted to like support me in my campaign, I think it's a very, very different thing than me as a congressperson in LA getting a giant check from like United Healthcare, which is based out of like Connecticut, right? Like, I think that's where that discrepancy is of, oh, I'm not getting all this money from pharma, or I'm not getting all this money from, major insurance companies, which in California is a huge thing with wildfires right now. But like, so I think it's not one thing to say you can't be interested in corporations and business interests, especially in your district. That's part of, I represent people and I represent businesses in this district. That's a natural thing, right? But I think for me, it is so refreshing to see people like, thank you for not taking corporate PAC money. Citizens United was such a red flag kind of moment that everyone remembers and sees the exact kind of correlation between it, right? And in tandem with that, I'm in favor of banning congressional stock trades. I'm in favor of banning stock ownership. Congressman Sherman has never signed on to that bill, and he obviously takes corporate PAC money. So for him, it's easy. He knows every January after election year, he's going to get $200,000 from corporate PACs on like day one. They all just write the check and it goes out the door. And so it allows him to not have to worry about coming back and interacting with voters and trying to fight for those into small dollars, which I'm doing right now. We've been very excited about the fundraising we've seen. Our deadline's coming up at the end of this month. But I think it's refreshing for people to see, oh, we actually can do this without having to do the whole rigmarole of being beholden to corporate interest. Now, in Congress, with lobbyists. I will take meetings with businesses, especially those in the district, obviously, that have legislation in front of whatever committee I'm on and stuff like that. That's a part of the business. That's a part of the job. But that does not mean I'm going to go around calling lobbyists and giant corporate PACs just expecting a $5,000 check every month or every time I run again, because then that completely detaches me from what's actually happening.
See, it's so interesting to me that you raised this topic, because I think a lot about the no corporate PAC money, and it's an interesting thing to talk about, because what does that really mean, right? Does it mean Chevron and ExxonMobil are sliding a $5,000 check and saying, oh, don't do anything for green energy? Or is it, and in Studio City, is it the dance studios? Is it like United Dance Workers? I don't know. I don't think that's a thing, but you see my point. Is it them saying, hey, like, you represent us, like, we want to keep you, like? And it's interesting because the word corporation is used so loosely. It's kind of thrown around as this like cartoon boogeyman, which you forget. It's like, if I have Disneyland in my district, well, I'm going to be fighting for Disneyland, right? I use that as because I remember that I worked for had Disneyland, so we would see them a lot. But with that corporate money, right? It's hard because it's complicated, it's messy, and it doesn't really make sense. But with your small dollar campaign, what are you doing with these dollars? How are you getting these? What are your sources? I mean, give us an inside scoop of what does it look like when you're running against an established Democrat?
So it is some call time. It's calling people who are bigger donors here, who like are kind of used to the playing of that. Right now, it's a lot of name recognition building for me online through social media, through meet and greets. We have been sending out emails and texts and stuff like that, the kind of traditional way of getting to those voters around the country who are engaged with this kind of politics, who want someone like me in Congress. And I'm getting $5 a month checks. I'm getting $10 a month checks. That's kind of the vast majority of things that I'm seeing, really. And I'm getting people from across the country go, thank you for running. Here's $25 from South Carolina. And it's just those kind of small dollars that's how it all starts to add up time and time again. And for me as a first-time candidate right now, it's mostly just name recognition building. It's social media. It's, like I said, going to houses and community groups to like just talk to them and say, hey, this is what I am. This is what I'm about. And from there, you kind of just start to build that relationship and go from there. So as the campaign goes on, and as we get more busy, obviously into the fall and next spring, when election gets a little closer, it gets a little bit more active. People start engaging more. People start paying attention more. So right now, it's just kind of reaching out, talking to anyone. I'll basically take more meetings and coffees than I've had my entire life over the last few months. But that's kind of the benefit of this is that I'm here, I'm on the ground, I can do this 24/7. I can outwork my opponent. I know I can. Age difference a little bit there helps. But that's kind of what it takes, is just to show that yes, you can, but it's more work involved. It's not just waiting for that check to come across from AT&T or Chevron, but it's going out there and talking to the local wine shop down the street and go, hey, how are you guys doing with the tariffs? Like, what's going on? How are you guys feeling with that? How are you guys doing rent wise? How are you guys doing employment wise? You're right, corporations can be anything from a mom and pop shop or all the way up to Google. So to not take so much corporate money, but just kind of taking your small businesses, which is a huge thing to my life. Both my parents were small business owners. To understand that's a very different economy than what Apple is dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I love the name recognition part of that and the social media being involved in that. I mean, I can't my mom was talking about this recently because my sister just graduated from high school, and she said I get more updates from the school over Instagram than I do from their website or email or phone calls or anything like that. Are there any, as a former comms guy, is there any like social media stuff that you're excited to do, or like any crazy ideas that you have kind of rattling around up there, or are you just
No, there are, and it's like the fun part of this is like you kind of just do a spaghetti against the walls method of like what the hell's gonna stick, and I think that's what most people on social media do. If you're like actually trying to use it to engage or grow a small business, whatever, like you never really know what your business and the algorithm's gonna really do. So we're doing a little bit more kind of day in the life. I'm trying to do more tours of small businesses in the district, kind of just stuff of like the back scenes of like what it is on a campaign trail, trying to keep those updates going of like, if you want to run for office one day and you're a younger person, like this is kind of what it looks like. If you have never done it before, whatever, if you have no idea what you're wanting to get into, this is kind of part of those day-to-day things. And then highlighting things in the district, seeing things that I see and be like, hey, I've seen more shops close down on Ventura Boulevard. Like what's, why is that a trend there? I've seen more crime on Ventura. I've seen, stuff like that come up. Or some big business opening. That's a huge thing, right? And so it's like, how do you showcase that too? Because part of, I think, I was saying earlier, it's like you legislate, communicate, and advocate. And part of that is advocating for your district, showing up, hey, the studios are opening up a new office in this district. That's going to be jobs. That's going to be more opportunity in this district. So the small business economy around that big employer is going to grow. You got more restaurants, got more, small businesses and stuff like that. Showcasing those things along the way to highlight this district and how incredibly impressive it is, and how big it is, but just to kind of keep that going. I think part of running for Congress is you represent this district. You should be a champion for this district. You should be trying to get more people here. You should be trying to get more business here. And I think social media, as you said, to get more updates from school from there, that's how most businesses are growing now. I don't know a single small business that is not having to engage in social media to get their name out there, to get out there. It's free. You can run it yourself, but be like, just to get immediately a niche audience that is so dedicated and so connected to you. And that's very true of politics also.
That's good. I'm curious on the campaign logistics side. Have you heard at all from the representative? Have you guys been in contact at all? And are you guys hoping to at some point have like a primary debate? Is that something you guys are trying to set up or pressure the congressman into agreeing to?
I have not heard a peep from the congressman directly. I hear a lot of him through press, but not from me personally. If we do a primary debate, that'd be great. I would welcome it. My guess is we probably will do, if him and I in the runoff, we'll do one probably in the runoff. I think there'll be more attention there. In the primary, there's still some other candidates jockeying around, so we'll see how that kind of plays out. Never know. It could pick up steam, and it could be a much more interesting kind of dynamic race later on down the pike, and then that changes things a little bit. But I'd welcome it. But I think part of this is just going around and talking to voters, and the amount of voters I've talked to have said, yeah, I was a lifelong resident. I've seen him there for so long. We're ready for someone new. Talk about kind of this exact conversation. What do you want to see different? How would you do different thing? And I think people are just open to the idea of, I don't have to vote for the same person again and again and again and expect different results. So that's kind of been the most rewarding thing, is talking to voters around the district to go, they're at least open to the idea that change is possible and like not the end of the world if you switch out the long term.
It's really such an interesting thing of them playing like a you don't exist game of playing footsie. I do wonder, when the time comes, will they come and meet you on the debate stage once, you advance the top two primary? And I'm sure that's a whole different story, given that it's over a year and a half away, right? It's a long ways away. But I mean, in a completely actually separate vein, I was going to say a similar vein, but we're going to go ahead and switch topics over to some sports. I know we touched a little bit on, from San Antonio, so you got some love for there, but you know what, whatever, I'll let that slide. Now being a Lakers fan, and then of course, go Dodgers with Ohtani. Yeah. I heard Luka has actually been losing some weight. I wanted to hear what your thoughts are about that. I heard he's on a significant weight loss journey on a strict diet, and I was like, wow, that's new.
He's losing weight, I guess.
What legislation will you propose in tax credits to help Luka with this journey?
Make Luka hop on his Ozempic.
Make Luka healthy again. I love it. It's funny that he moved from Texas to California and jumped on the health train like immediately he got here. That's not, I think, too unusual. I think a lot of people get out here, and it's just much more, a little healthy thinking of way you approach food, or what you think about fitness. You can be outdoors here a lot more. It's probably, I think, like 105 degrees in Dallas today, and meanwhile LA is like, it's sitting at 79, so a little bit more easy to do that. I think it's natural to just, you get into a new mindset, you want to try something new, you kind of go through that change in life, and working with people like LeBron James, people who've been there for so long, and who have, obviously James is still in amazing shape. I mean, he's phenomenal and probably one of the strongest people on the court. I think surround yourself with that kind of mentality, you're just naturally probably going to align with yourself with it. So excited to see what comes of it after the summer.
Big news for your Lakers as well. As a Warriors fan, it was a little scary for me, but you guys just sold the team to the Dodgers owner. So yeah. I'm curious, did you have any reaction to that when you saw it, or have you heard anything in the district? And I'm a little scared because clearly you guys have the unlimited money glitch now to save us.
It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, coming into next year during the portal and kind of seeing who they can recruit and as things shift. It's, I know the family's had the Lakers for a super long time, and interesting to see how, because I think they still have some control in their involvement, so it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. The guys behind the Dodgers have done an amazing job. They've built that empire where it is now, with the amount of recruitment they've done, World Series champs last year. So to see if they bring some of that expertise into a new league is an exciting time for the Lakers, to see if they can really springboard that with second round draft pick and then Luka and all that, to see if they can really recreate a new dynasty like back when they had Kobe and them back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I think with LeBron's longevity, I think we need Brad Sherman to hop on that longevity, taking
Is he
care of his
doing the
body
cryo
type of thing.
chamber? I
And
don't
then
think
maybe,
so.
yeah, maybe we wouldn't even be having this conversation if he
Yeah.
hopped on that wavelength. But unless you guys have anything else, I want to say thank you, Jake, for hopping on with us and talking sports, talking politics, and everything. And where can people find your campaign website, social
Yeah.
media, stuff like that? Where can they support
No,
you?
thanks for you guys having me. Great conversation. I love these kind of talks. This is what I think Democrats are really needing right now. And for me, you can find me at jakeforcongress.com and at Jake Rakov on all major social channels.
Great.
Fantastic.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Jake, for your time. And thank you, Max. Thank you, Ben. And thank you for listening to Brogressive.
Thanks so
Appreciate
much.
it.
Thanks, Joe.